You know, sometimes we think that just having good intentions is enough, right? But here's the thing, if those good intentions aren't backed up by the right actions, they won't lead to God's blessing. And that's really the core message of what we're diving into today. We're looking at 1 Chronicles 11, where David is finally made king of Israel. But it's not just about his rise to power, it's about how his actions, not just his intentions, set the stage for God's favor. So let's take a look at this story and see how it all unfolds. To understand the deeper significance of 1 Chronicles, it's important to step back and grasp the historical context in which it was written. The book of 1 Chronicles is part of a larger collection known as the Chronicles, which in the Hebrew Bible is a single book. The purpose of this book was to remind the Jewish people of their history and identity, especially after a period of great loss and exile. This was written at a time when the Jewish people had returned from their captivity in Babylon, but many had forgotten their heritage, their traditions, and their place in God's story. You see, the Jewish people were exiled to Babylon in 586 BC after their defeat by the Babylonians, a nation that was at the peak of its power. The Babylonians had destroyed Jerusalem, along with the sacred temple that had stood as a symbol of God's presence among his people. For 70 long years, the Israelites were displaced from their homeland, scattered across the Babylonian Empire, living as exiles in a foreign land. During this time, they struggled to maintain their cultural identity, as they lived under the oppression of the Babylonians, who were polytheistic and worshipped many gods. This exile was part of God's plan for Israel. He had used the Babylonians as a tool of discipline to correct his people. Israel had fallen deeply into idolatry and sin, worshipping other gods and neglecting the covenant they had made with God. The exile was a means of purging the nation of these idols. In the years that followed, as the Israelites lived in Babylon, they began to reflect on their history and their relationship with God. And that's where the book of Chronicles comes in. The Chronicles were written to help the returning exiles reconnect with their history, to remember their roots, and to be reminded of the covenant they had with God. Most of the people returning from Babylon were born in exile and had never even seen the land of Israel, let alone experienced the glory of the temple. So the chronicler, the author of this book, set out to condense the history of Israel into a brief and accessible form that could educate and inspire those returning from exile. Now, the focus of 1 Chronicles is primarily on the reign of King David. After the death of King Saul, the first king of Israel, David emerged as a leader chosen by God to lead his people. But the transition from Saul to David wasn't smooth or immediate. It was marked by political and military turmoil, with Saul's family trying to maintain control and David being recognized by a smaller tribe, Judah, before he became king over all Israel. David's rise to power began when he was still a young man. He was chosen by God and anointed by the prophet Samuel while he was just a boy, likely somewhere between 10 and 15 years old. It's hard to imagine someone so young being set apart for such a great responsibility, but that's exactly what happened. God saw in David a heart of integrity, a heart of worship, and a heart that would seek God's guidance, even in the most difficult of circumstances. But even though David was chosen by God, it would take years before he would fully step into the role of king. David's path to the throne was a long and challenging one. After being anointed by Samuel, David continued working as a shepherd and serving in King Saul's court. He became famous after he defeated the giant Goliath with nothing but a sling and a stone. This victory made David a hero in Israel, but it also made him a target for Saul, who grew increasingly jealous of David's success and popularity. Saul's jealousy led him to try to kill David on multiple occasions. For years, David was forced to flee, living as a fugitive, often hiding in caves or seeking refuge with other nations. It wasn't until Saul's death that David's path to the throne became clear. Saul, who had once been anointed king by God, died in battle along with his sons, including Jonathan, who was David's closest friend. This was a devastating moment for Israel, as Saul's death left a power vacuum in the nation. But David's path to the throne was still not guaranteed. Although Saul's death meant that the throne was now open, the nation was divided. David was initially crowned king of Judah, the southern tribe of Israel, while another man, Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, was crowned king of the northern tribes. This division caused conflict and civil war within Israel, with both sides vying for control of the entire nation. David's reign as king began when he was 30 years old, but it was not until he was 37 that he was recognized as king over all Israel. After years of conflict and warfare, the northern tribes finally acknowledged that David was God's chosen king. They came to him in Hebron and declared, "We are your bone and flesh," acknowledging David's rightful place as king. It was at this point that David was formally made king of Israel, and his leadership began to take shape. David's leadership was crucial in uniting the tribes of Israel and securing the nation's future. After becoming king of all Israel, one of David's first acts was to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, making it the spiritual and political center of Israel. He also established Jerusalem as the capital city, ensuring that it would be the center of worship and governance for generations to come. David was not just a warrior king, though. He was also a man of faith. His heart for God and his commitment to worship shaped the way he ruled. His reign marked a time of prosperity and stability for Israel, as he expanded the kingdom's borders and secured peace on all sides. He was a man after God's own heart, and his leadership set a standard for kingship that would be referenced for generations. But David's reign was not without its challenges. Despite his faithfulness to God, David was still human, and he made mistakes. His affair with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband, Uriah, was a dark moment in his life and reign. Yet even in his failure, David's heart remained loyal to God, and he repented of his sins. God, in his mercy, forgave David and continued to bless him and his kingdom. David's leadership and his desire to see Israel thrive were key in shaping the future of the nation. He established a kingdom that would continue to grow and prosper under his son, Solomon. David's reign is often remembered as a time of unity and peace, a period when the nation of Israel experienced its golden age. His legacy would live on in the lineage of kings that followed him, and ultimately in the birth of Jesus Christ, who would come from the line of David. In 1 Chronicles, the chronicler emphasizes the importance of David's leadership not just in terms of military victories and political achievements, but in his faithfulness to God and his desire to see the people of Israel worship the one true God. David was a man who, despite his flaws, sought God with all his heart, and his reign set the stage for the flourishing of Israel. His life and leadership would serve as a model for future generations, showing them what it meant to follow God wholeheartedly and to trust in his plan for the nation. The chronicler's purpose in writing this book was not only to record the events of Israel's past, but also to inspire the returning exiles to remember the legacy of their people and to return to their faithfulness to God. By looking at the story of David, the chronicler reminded the people of Israel that their history was not just about military victories and royal bloodlines. It was about the faithfulness of God to his people and the need for Israel to remain faithful to him. David's reign was a time when Israel thrived because of God's blessing, and the people were called to return to that same faithfulness, trusting that God would bless them once again if they followed his ways. The story of David's conquest of Jerusalem is one of the most significant moments in his reign, and it marks the beginning of the city's role as the spiritual and political center of Israel. Jerusalem, at the time, was a fortified city inhabited by the Jebusites, a Canaanite people who were the descendants of Ham, one of Noah's sons. The Jebusites were deeply entrenched in the city, and they viewed themselves as invincible, thinking that no army could ever breach their stronghold. But David, the anointed king, had a vision for Jerusalem that went far beyond its geographical importance. He knew that to unite the tribes of Israel and solidify his reign, he needed to make Jerusalem the capital of the nation. At this point in the narrative, David had already been anointed king over all Israel. However, his reign was still in its early stages, and one of his first major challenges was to take Jerusalem from the Jebusites. The city was strategically located, sitting on a high hill with steep, rocky terrain that made it difficult for any army to attack. The Jebusites had built walls around the city, creating an almost impenetrable fortress. They were so confident in the strength of their city that they taunted David and his army, believing that no one could ever conquer them. But David had a plan. He was no ordinary king, he was a military strategist, and he understood the importance of both tactical ingenuity and the support of his men. Well, he knew that the only way to conquer the city was to outsmart the Jebusites, and he had an idea that would involve the use of the city's water supply. The key to the Jebusites' defense lay in their water system, which was supplied by a series of tunnels and shafts that ran underground, providing access to the city's wells. David turned to his commander, Joab, a skilled military leader who had earned a reputation for his bravery and strategic thinking. Joab would play a crucial role in the capture of Jerusalem. The plan was simple, yet brilliant. They would infiltrate the city through the water shaft. David promised that whoever was the first to breach the city would be made the commander of his army, a powerful incentive for Joab and his men. The story of how Joab successfully infiltrated the Jebusite city is both remarkable and a testament to his skill as a soldier. The city's walls and defenses were strong, but Joab and his men found a way to enter the city through a vertical water shaft. This shaft was a narrow underground passage that connected the city to the water supply. The Jebusites, confident in the strength of their walls, never anticipated that anyone would be able to enter the city through such an unlikely route. Joab, however, was determined to prove them wrong. Climbing through this narrow and treacherous shaft, Joab and his soldiers made their way into the heart of the city. The element of surprise was on their side, and once they had gained entry, they opened the gates to allow the rest of David's army to storm the city. The Jebusites, caught off guard by this unexpected attack, were overwhelmed by David's forces. The city fell quickly, and the Jebusites were either defeated or forced to flee. With the city conquered, David established Jerusalem as his capital. He renamed the City of David, and it would go on to become the most important city in Israel. But the significance of David's conquest of Jerusalem goes far beyond just the military victory. David was not merely looking to add a strategic city to his kingdom, he was setting the stage for the future of Israel as a unified nation, and Jerusalem would play a central role in that unity. David's decision to make Jerusalem his capital was not just a political move, it had deep religious significance as well. Jerusalem would become the center of worship for the Israelites, and it was where the Ark of the Covenant would eventually be brought. The Ark, which symbolized God's presence among his people, was not in Jerusalem at this time. It had been kept in other locations, but David knew that bringing it to Jerusalem would solidify the city's role as the spiritual heart of Israel. The capture of Jerusalem also symbolized David's strength as a leader. He was able to overcome what seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, and he did so by relying on both his military expertise and his faith in God. Throughout David's reign, it was clear that his success was not just due to his own abilities, but also to the guidance and blessing of God. Even in the face of seemingly impossible odds, David trusted that God would provide the victory, and in this case, God led him to conquer the Jebusite city. David's conquest of Jerusalem was also a unifying moment for Israel. Up until this point, the nation had been divided, with different tribes loyal to different leaders. But by capturing Jerusalem, David was able to bring the entire nation together under one banner. Jerusalem became the symbol of Israel's unity, and it was the place where all the tribes could come together and worship God. This unity was essential for the strength and prosperity of the nation, and it was something that David worked hard to maintain throughout his reign. The conquest of Jerusalem, while a victory, was also a reminder of the importance of leadership. David's leadership was not just about military prowess, but about making decisions that would benefit the people as a whole. His choice to make Jerusalem the capital was a forward-thinking decision that would have lasting consequences for the entire nation. It was a decision that brought unity, peace, and the presence of God to the center of Israel's life. Joab's role in the conquest of Jerusalem cannot be understated. While David was the king, Joab was the military leader who executed the strategy and led the troops into battle. His bravery and skill were key to the success of the campaign. Joab would go on to become one of David's most trusted commanders, but his relationship with David would become complicated later on. And despite their occasional tensions, Joab's role in David's rise to power was crucial, and his victory in Jerusalem would forever cement his place in Israel's military history. The military tactics used by Joab and David in the conquest of Jerusalem are also worth noting. The use of the water shaft to infiltrate the city was a brilliant move that allowed them to bypass the city's formidable defenses. The element of surprise played a key role in the success of the attack, and Joab's leadership ensured that the city was captured quickly and efficiently. This military success demonstrated David's strategic thinking and his ability to lead his men to victory, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. But the conquest of Jerusalem was not just about a military victory, it was about establishing a foundation for the future of Israel. David's reign marked the beginning of a new era for the nation, and Jerusalem would be at the center of it all. From this point forward, Jerusalem would be the place where God's presence dwelled, where the people of Israel would gather to worship, and where future generations would look to for guidance and strength. As we look back on David's conquest of Jerusalem, we see more than just a military victory. We see a leader who was guided by faith, who understood the importance of unity, and who made decisions that would shape the future of his people. David's conquest of Jerusalem was a pivotal moment in Israel's history, and it set the stage for the greatness that would follow. The city would go on to become a symbol of Israel's power, its faith, and its unity, and it would remain the heart of the nation for generations to come. David's success in Jerusalem was also a reminder that God's ways are not always conventional, but they are always effective. While the Jebusites relied on their strong defenses and their belief that their city was impregnable, David knew that victory came from God, not from human strength. By relying on God's wisdom and guidance, David was able to achieve what seemed impossible, and this victory would be remembered as one of the greatest moments of his reign. Jerusalem, the city of David, would become the city where God's presence was most keenly felt, and it would be the place where generations of Israelites would look for hope, guidance, and strength. The conquest of Jerusalem marked the beginning of a new chapter in Israel's story, one that would be defined by David's leadership and the nation's unity, and it all began with a strategic military victory that brought a divided people together and established a new capital for the nation. For David, it was more than just a military conquest. It was the fulfillment of a vision that would shape the future of Israel and leave a legacy that would last for generations. David's rise to power wasn't achieved alone. Behind every great leader is a group of individuals who, in their loyalty and bravery, make the impossible possible. And for David, this group was known as the mighty men. These were not just ordinary soldiers, they were elite warriors, men of incredible strength, skill, and courage who had earned their place in David's inner circle. They fought alongside him through countless battles, and their loyalty to David became legendary. Without them, David's ascent to the throne, as well as his consolidation of power, would have been nearly impossible. The mighty men were more than just soldiers. They were David's special forces, his inner circle of warriors who showed unwavering loyalty and dedication to him. They were the men who believed in David, not just as a king, but as the one chosen by God to lead Israel. And it wasn't just their prowess in battle that made them remarkable, it was their dedication to David's cause, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Their loyalty would be tested time and again, but through each challenge, they proved themselves worthy of the title Mighty Men. One of the most famous of these mighty men was Josheb-Basshebeth, the Tachmonite. He was the first among the mighty men and a leader in his own right. His claim to fame came from a single act of bravery that cemented his place in David's history. In one battle, Josheb-Basshebeth took on an astonishing feat. He single-handedly defeated 300 enemy soldiers. With nothing but a spear in his hand, he fought off wave after wave of attackers, and in the end, he was victorious. This act of heroism set the tone for the mighty men's unwavering commitment to David. Josheb-Basshebeth's courage and strength were unmatched, and his place in the ranks of the mighty men was unquestioned. Then there was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, another of David's top warriors. Eleazar's story is one of sheer endurance and determination. During a battle against the Philistines, Eleazar found himself in a field of barley with just a few of his men. The Israelites had been driven back, and the field was left undefended, but Eleazar wasn't about to back down. He fought fiercely to protect the field, holding his ground against the Philistine army. The battle raged on, but Eleazar never wavered. His hand was so firmly gripped around his sword that it froze to his hand after hours of fighting. By the time the battle was over, Eleazar had single-handedly slain dozens of enemy soldiers. His bravery and unshakable resolve earned him a place among the elite. David knew that men like Eleazar, who stood firm in the face of danger, were indispensable to the success of his kingdom. Among the mighty men, there was also Shammah, whose story is particularly striking. While Eleazar defended the barley field, Shammah defended an entire field of lentils. The Bible doesn't give us much information about the circumstances of this battle, but what it does tell us is enough to understand the significance of Shammah's bravery. While the rest of the army fled, Shammah stood alone and fought off the Philistines, defending the lentil field. To some, it may seem trivial to defend a field of lentils, but Shammah understood that loyalty to God and to his people meant standing firm, no matter how small the territory might seem. His act of valor speaks to the importance of standing your ground and defending what's rightfully yours, no matter how insignificant others may think it is. For Shammah, it wasn't about the field itself. It was about showing that no matter the cost, he would protect the land that was entrusted to him. Another of David's mighty men was Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. Benaiah was a man of exceptional skill and courage. One of his most memorable feats occurred during a battle with the Moabites, where he fought and killed 2 lion-like warriors. But perhaps the most incredible feat of Benaiah's career was when he fought a lion. On a snowy day, while in a pit, Benaiah encountered a lion. Instead of being intimidated or running away, Benaiah jumped into the pit with the lion, determined to defeat it. He wrestled the lion and ultimately killed it, proving his unmatched bravery. But that wasn't all. Benaiah would go on to defeat an Egyptian giant, a man who was over 7 feet tall. Despite the odds, Benaiah didn't hesitate. With a staff in hand, he approached the giant and, after a fierce struggle, he killed him with the giant's own spear. For his courage and victories, Benaiah was appointed the head of David's bodyguard, an elite position that would come with great responsibility. The mighty men were not only warriors, they were also incredibly loyal. Their loyalty to David was shown in the most profound ways, even when it meant personal sacrifice. One of the most poignant examples of this loyalty came during a time when David and his men were hiding in the cave of Adullam. David was weary, and he longed for a drink of water from the well of Bethlehem, his hometown. It was a simple desire, but it spoke volumes about his love for his homeland. However, at that time, Bethlehem was under the control of the Philistines, and it was impossible to get to the well without risking their lives. But the mighty men heard David's longing, and without hesitation, they broke through the enemy lines and fought their way to the well. They drew water from the well of Bethlehem and brought it back to David. When David received the water, he was deeply moved by their sacrifice. He realized that these men had risked their lives for something as small as a drink of water, and yet, in their loyalty, they had given him everything. In response, David poured the water out as a drink offering to God, saying that it was too precious to drink after such a sacrifice. This act of selflessness from his mighty men demonstrated the depth of their commitment to David, and it was a testament to the extraordinary bond they shared. The loyalty of David's mighty men was unparalleled. They weren't just following a king, they were following a man they believed in, a man they trusted with their lives. They knew that David was not just anointed by God, but that he was the one who would lead Israel to greatness. Their loyalty was not based on personal gain or ambition. It was based on a deep, unshakable belief in David's leadership and in God's plan for the nation of Israel. The mighty men weren't just a collection of individuals with extraordinary strength and skill. They were a brotherhood, bound together by loyalty, faith, and a shared mission. And it wasn't just their acts of bravery on the battlefield that set them apart. It was their willingness to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, for David and the nation of Israel. They were willing to fight, to bleed, and even to die for the cause they believed in. David's mighty men were also a reflection of the kind of leader David was. They didn't follow him because of his wealth or power. They followed him because they believed in his heart for God and his vision for Israel. In many ways, David's relationship with his mighty men mirrors the relationship he had with God. Just as David trusted in God's guidance and followed his will, so too did his mighty men trust in David's leadership and follow his commands. The mighty men were also a powerful reminder of the importance of loyalty in leadership. David's success was not solely due to his own strength or abilities, but to the unwavering support of those who believed in him. His leadership was built on the foundation of trust and loyalty, and it was through this foundation that Israel was able to thrive. The loyalty of David's mighty men became a key factor in the stability of his reign, and it laid the groundwork for the strength of the nation as a whole. Throughout David's reign, the mighty men continued to serve him faithfully. They fought beside him in battles, helped him secure the throne, and protected him during times of crisis. Their loyalty was never in question, and it was through their strength and unity that David was able to accomplish so much. But even more than that, their loyalty became a symbol of what true devotion looks like: devotion to a cause, to a leader, and to a greater purpose. In many ways, the mighty men of David represent the ideal of loyalty and courage. Their stories remind us that true greatness isn't achieved through individual accomplishments alone. It's achieved through the support of those who stand with you, fight with you, and sacrifice for you. Their loyalty to David is a testament to the power of unity and faith, and it serves as an enduring example of what it means to be a faithful servant of a greater purpose. And as we look at the lives of these men, we see not just warriors, but men of character, men who understood that true strength lies in the bonds of loyalty and the courage to follow through with unwavering commitment. There's a story among David's mighty men that stands as a shining example of the kind of loyalty that went beyond ordinary friendship. It's a story that captures the depth of their commitment to David and the sacrifices they were willing to make, not out of duty or obligation, but out of genuine love and devotion. This story takes place during a time when David was hiding from King Saul, who was determined to take David's life. David and his men were on the run, and they had found refuge in the cave of Adullam. They were far from home, far from any real comfort, living as fugitives in constant danger. But despite these circumstances, David's heart longed for something simple, something he had once taken for granted. He longed for a drink of water from the well in Bethlehem, his hometown. David wasn't just asking for a drink of water. Bethlehem represented his roots, his home, the place where his story had begun. It was where he had grown up, where he had spent his youth tending sheep, dreaming of a future that seemed so far away at the time. Now, as he sat in the cave, separated from everything familiar, the thought of that well, cool, refreshing water from the heart of his homeland became a symbol of comfort and peace, a brief escape from the harshness of his current life. It was a fleeting desire, a moment of nostalgia, but David voiced it aloud to his men. But this was no ordinary group of men David was speaking to. These were his mighty men, the elite warriors who had fought alongside him through thick and thin, who had followed him through every trial, battle, and hardship. And when they heard David's longing, they didn't brush it aside. They didn't dismiss it as a mere wish or a passing thought. They took it to heart. They understood that this wasn't just about water, it was about loyalty. They saw in David's longing a chance to show just how far they would go for him, how deeply they were willing to sacrifice for the man they believed in. The mighty men knew that Bethlehem was under the control of the Philistines, Israel's enemies. It was a heavily fortified city, and to venture into the heart of it would mean risking their lives. But that didn't matter to them. Without hesitation, they made the decision to go. They gathered their strength and courage and set off toward Bethlehem, determined to fulfill David's wish. No matter the cost, they would not allow the distance or the danger to stop them. The journey was long and the risks were great, but they didn't flinch. These men were willing to go into enemy territory, to break through the Philistine lines, all for a simple drink of water for their king. This act of bravery was not just about the water itself. It was about the sacrifice. It was about the lengths to which these men would go for the person they followed. It was about loyalty, the kind of loyalty that isn't just about words, but about actions. These mighty men didn't simply say they were loyal to David, they proved it with their actions, with their willingness to risk their lives to meet his need. Their loyalty was unwavering, and it was this kind of loyalty that defined the strength of David's leadership. They were not just his soldiers, they were his friends, his brothers in arms, bound by a shared mission and a deep sense of duty to one another. When the mighty men returned to David, they brought with them the water from the well of Bethlehem. But David didn't drink it. He didn't take a single sip. Instead, he poured it out as a drink offering to God, saying, Far be it from me, O my God, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of these men who went at the risk of their lives?" David recognized the immense sacrifice these men had made, and he knew that their loyalty was so pure, so selfless, that it deserved to be honored in the highest way. Now, by pouring out the water, David was acknowledging that it wasn't just a drink, it was the blood of his men. The very essence of their loyalty is poured out in service to him. David's decision to pour out the water might seem strange at first. After all, this was a gift, an offering from his men. But David understood that true loyalty isn't about the gift itself, it's about the sacrifice behind it. The water wasn't just water to David, it was the embodiment of his men's devotion. And in that moment, David knew that the greatest way to honor their sacrifice was to offer it back to God. By pouring out the water, David was giving thanks for the loyalty and love his men had shown, and he was acknowledging that their sacrifices were not just for him, but for the God who had chosen him as king. This story teaches us something profound about friendship, loyalty, and sacrifice. In today's world, where loyalty is often tested and watered down by convenience or self-interest, the kind of loyalty shown by David's mighty men seems rare. But it's the kind of loyalty that we should all strive for in our relationships, whether with our friends, our families, or our communities. The loyalty of David's men wasn't contingent on their comfort or their personal gain. They didn't do it because they thought they would receive something in return. They did it because they believed in David. They trusted him, and they knew that their loyalty was not just to a man, but to a purpose far greater than themselves. This kind of loyalty requires sacrifice. It requires going beyond the easy things, beyond what's comfortable or convenient. It means showing up when it's hard, when the stakes are high, and when the risks are great. David's mighty men didn't hesitate because their loyalty to David was stronger than their fear. They were willing to sacrifice their own safety, their time, and even their lives for the man they had sworn to follow. Loyalty, however, isn't just about big heroic gestures. It's also about the small, everyday acts of devotion. Loyalty is about being there for someone, not just in times of victory, but in times of struggle. It's about being willing to listen, to support, and to stand beside someone even when the world seems against them. David's mighty men weren't just loyal to David in moments of grandeur, they were loyal to him every day, in every battle, and in every challenge. And that is the essence of true loyalty. This story of sacrifice is also a reminder that loyalty isn't always easy. It comes with challenges. It can be tested when we face adversity or when we have to make difficult choices. Yet, just as David's mighty men stood by him in times of struggle, we too are called to stand by the people we care about. No matter the cost, loyalty isn't about being there when it's easy. It's about being there when it's hard. It's about putting the needs of others before our own desires, about sacrificing for the greater good, and about showing up even when it's inconvenient. David's mighty men demonstrated that true loyalty is selfless and sacrificial. It's not about what we can get in return, but about what we are willing to give. Their loyalty to David was unconditional, and their sacrifice was the highest form of friendship. It's the kind of loyalty that comes from the heart, and it's the kind of friendship that transcends time and circumstance. Their actions were a living example of what it means to be truly loyal, to truly sacrifice for the ones we love, and to show up even when it's hard. As we reflect on the story of David and his mighty men, we are reminded of the power of loyal friendship. Loyalty is not just a word we say, it's a commitment we make through our actions. And in a world that can often be selfish and self-serving, the kind of loyalty shown by David's men is a rare and precious thing. It's a loyalty that's willing to sacrifice, willing to go the extra mile, and willing to put the needs of others first. It's the kind of loyalty that strengthens bonds and deepens relationships. And it's the kind of loyalty that we should all strive to embody in our own lives. The incident with Uzzah during the transport of the Ark of the Covenant is one of the more perplexing and unsettling moments in David's reign, and it raises important questions about the nature of worship and obedience to God. As we've seen, David had a great desire to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. He understood the significance of the Ark as a symbol of God's presence among his people, and he knew that it would solidify Jerusalem as the spiritual center of Israel. But the way David chose to bring the ark into the city was not in accordance with God's instructions, and what happened next was both tragic and confusing. At the time, the ark had been in the house of Abinadab in a town called Kiriath Jearim for many years. It had been there since the time when the Philistines had captured it and then returned it. Recognizing the curse it brought upon them, David, now king, wanted the ark brought to Jerusalem, and he organized a procession to do just that. He gathered a large number of Israelites, including the Levites, who were tasked with carrying the ark. David and the people celebrated, singing and dancing as the ark was loaded onto a new cart to be transported to Jerusalem. However, right at the moment when the ark was being carried on the cart, something unexpected and tragic occurred. The cart, as it was being pulled by oxen, stumbled. In that moment, Uzzah, one of the men accompanying the ark, reached out his hand to steady it, to prevent the ark from falling. But as soon as his hand touched the ark, something shocking happened. God's anger was aroused, and Uzzah was struck dead on the spot. This sudden and unexpected death of Uzzah left David and everyone around him confused and deeply troubled. The question that immediately arises is, why did this happen? After all, Uzzah's action seemed noble. He was trying to prevent the ark from falling, a holy object, from touching the ground. It seemed like a reasonable thing to do, a simple attempt to protect something sacred. So why did God respond so harshly? Why did Uzzah die for this seemingly innocent action? David was understandably angry and upset. He had gathered the people together with great anticipation, expecting this procession to be a moment of celebration and triumph. Instead, it turned into a moment of fear and confusion. David was afraid to continue bringing the ark into Jerusalem, and he even questioned whether it was right to do so. He left the ark at the house of a man named Obed-Edom, just outside the city, and for 3 months, David waited, uncertain of what to make of the situation. The death of Uzzah serves as a stark reminder of the importance of following God's prescribed ways in worship. In this case, the ark was being transported in a manner that was not in line with God's instructions. According to the law, the ark was to be carried by the Levites, using poles that were inserted through rings on the sides of the ark. It was not to be placed on a cart, and it certainly was not to be touched by anyone, as it represented God's holy presence. The cart and the oxen were methods that had been used by the Philistines when they returned the ark, but God's people were to approach the ark and its transport with reverence and in accordance with his instructions. When Uzzah touched the ark, it was not just an innocent act of trying to keep it from falling. It was a violation of God's command. God had made it clear that no one was to touch the ark, and Uzzah's action, though well-meaning, showed a disregard for God's holiness and the specific instructions he had given for how the ark was to be treated. The ark represented the presence of a holy God, and to treat it casually or without the proper reverence was a serious offense. The lesson here is not just about the physical act of transporting the ark. It's about understanding that worshiping God requires reverence and obedience. It's not enough to just have good intentions or to do what seems right in our eyes. We must approach God in the way he has prescribed, through obedience to his word and his commands. Worship is not something we can approach casually or on our own terms. God is holy, and when we enter into his presence, we must do so with humility, reverence, and a willingness to submit to his ways. This moment of confusion and anger for David became a turning point. After 3 months, David came to realize that the ark needed to be brought into Jerusalem, but it had to be done in the proper way. He returned to the house of Obed-Edom and, this time, followed the instructions God had given for transporting the ark. The Levites, instead of using a cart, carried the ark on poles, and David and the people celebrated in the way God had intended. As the ark entered Jerusalem, David danced before the Lord with all his might, showing his joy and reverence for God's presence. This time, the procession was full of praise and worship, as it was done according to God's will. The incident with Uzzah and the ark teaches us an important lesson about the nature of God and our relationship with him. It shows us that God is not to be treated casually or on our own terms. His holiness demands respect, and when we come before him, we must do so in a way that honors his authority. God's ways are not arbitrary or burdensome. They are for our good and for his glory. When we choose to follow his prescribed ways, we align ourselves with his purposes, and we experience the blessings that come from walking in obedience. David's anger and confusion were natural reactions to something that didn't make sense at first. But over time, as he reflected on the situation, he came to understand the importance of following God's instructions. This is a key principle in worship. Obedience is a vital part of honoring God. Worship is not just about our emotions or our desires. It's about aligning our hearts and actions with God's will. And when we do so, we invite His blessing, His presence, and His favor into our lives. The story of Uzzah's death is a sobering reminder that God's holiness must be respected, but it also points us to the grace that is available to us through Jesus Christ. In the Old Testament, the ark was the symbol of God's presence, and it was surrounded by strict rules of reverence. But in the New Testament, Jesus Christ becomes the ultimate expression of God's presence with us through His life, death, and resurrection. Jesus made it possible for us to approach God with confidence, not because of our own righteousness, but because of His grace. While we are called to worship God with reverence and obedience, we can also rest in the fact that Jesus has made a way for us to come before God's throne of grace. In the end, the story of Uzzah and the ark challenges us to examine our own approach to worship. Are we following God's prescribed ways, or are we seeking to worship on our own terms? Are we treating God with the reverence He deserves, or are we approaching Him casually? Worship is a serious matter, and it is something that should never be taken lightly. But when we approach God with humility, obedience, and a heart of reverence, we can be assured that He will bless our worship and draw near to us. The story of Uzzah and the transport of the ark is not just a historical account. It carries with it a profound lesson that transcends time. The lesson is simple yet powerful. Good intentions alone do not justify wrong actions. This truth is something we must all grapple with in our own lives. David had the best of intentions. He wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, to make it the heart of Israel's worship, to place God's presence at the center of the nation. What could be more noble? Right? His desire to honor God by bringing the ark to Jerusalem was a worthy goal. But despite his good intentions, the way he went about it was wrong. And in the end, this misstep led to tragedy. David's well-meaning plan to transport the ark on a cart, using the method the Philistines had used, was not in line with God's commands. God had specifically prescribed how the ark was to be carried, and it was to be done by the Levites, not on a cart but with poles through rings on the ark. There was a reason for this. The ark represented the very presence of a holy and sovereign God. It was sacred, and the way it was handled was a reflection of the reverence due to God. It was not just about getting the ark from point A to point B. It was about how God's people approached His presence in worship. But David didn't follow God's instructions. His good intentions to bring the ark to Jerusalem were not enough to excuse the fact that he disregarded the specific way God had laid out for transporting the ark. The consequences were severe. When Uzzah reached out to steady the ark as it stumbled, he was struck dead by God. His death and the anger and confusion it caused David were a stark reminder that obedience to God's ways is non-negotiable. Even if our intentions are good, it's a reminder that God's holiness must be respected and His commands must be followed, not based on what seems right to us, but on what He has specifically said. This brings us to a key principle in our own walk with God. Good intentions alone do not justify wrong actions. How many times do we find ourselves in situations where we feel like we have good reasons for doing something, but the way we go about it doesn't line up with God's word? It's easy to think, well, my heart is in the right place, so God will understand. But God doesn't just look at our hearts, He looks at our actions. He has laid out specific ways for us to live, ways that honor Him and bring about blessings. Just because we want to do something good doesn't mean it's okay to take shortcuts or to do it on our own terms. God's way is always the best way, and it's the way that leads to blessings and success. Think about it this way. When we are striving to live a life that honors God, we can't simply rely on our own wisdom or understanding. We need to look to His word for guidance. We can have the best of intentions in our work, our relationships, and our worship. But if we are not following God's commands, our efforts can fall short. Just like David's desire to bring the ark to Jerusalem was good, our efforts may seem good on the surface. But unless we are obedient to God's way, those efforts will not bear the fruit we hope for. God's ways are not arbitrary. They are designed for our good. When He commands something, it's because He knows what is best for us. God's desire is to bless us, to lead us to success, and to keep us safe. But that blessing comes through obedience, not through doing things our own way. God's commandments are not meant to limit us, but to guide us into the fullness of life that He has prepared for us. In David's case, after the incident with Uzzah, he took time to reflect and pray, and he realized that in his desire to honor God, he had missed the mark. Once he understood the importance of following God's prescribed way, he went back and brought the ark to Jerusalem in the correct manner. This time, he did so with reverence, following God's instructions precisely. And when the ark entered Jerusalem, it was a moment of great celebration. The people praised and worshiped God because David had brought the ark into the city in a way that honored God's holiness. This moment was a turning point for David, and it is a turning point for us as well. It reminds us that while good intentions are important, they cannot replace obedience to God's commands. David's desire to bring the ark to Jerusalem was pure, but it was only when he followed God's way that he experienced true success and blessing. In the same way, and when we align our actions with God's will, that's when we see His blessings poured out in our lives. Obedience opens the door to God's favor, and when we walk in His ways, we walk in the path that leads to true success. The incident with Uzzah teaches us that we cannot pick and choose when to obey God. It's easy to follow God when it's convenient or when we agree with His instructions. But God calls us to obedience in all things. Even when we don't understand why He has commanded something, or when it seems like we're trying to do something good, we must trust that God's way is the best way. It's a reminder that our actions should reflect our faith, and that true worship comes when we honor God, not just with our hearts, but with our actions. So, let this story be a lesson to us all. Let it be a reminder that good intentions are not enough. We need to align our lives with God's will, and we need to follow His way in everything we do. God's instructions are clear, and they are given to us for our good. When we follow His way, we will experience His blessings, and we will find success in the things that matter most. David learned this lesson, and it's a lesson we need to learn too. It's not enough to just want to do good. We need to make sure we are doing it the right way. And when we do things God's way, that's when His blessings will flow, and that's when we will truly experience success, peace, and joy in our lives. So let us be obedient to God, not just in our intentions, but in our actions, and trust that His way is the way that leads to the life He has promised us. As we reflect on the story of David and Uzzah, we're reminded of the importance of not just having good intentions, but truly aligning our actions with God's way. It's so easy to get caught up in what we think is right. But true success and blessing come when we seek to follow God's prescribed path, even when it's challenging. So, take a moment today to think about how you're approaching the decisions in your life. Are you doing things your way, or are you following God's direction? Remember, when we align our actions with His will, we open the door to His favor and blessing. If this message has resonated with you, consider taking a step further in your own journey, maybe by sharing this video with others or subscribing for more insights. Either way, I hope this encourages you to live with purpose and intention, grounded in God's guidance.